Welcome everyone to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelard, and this is Chingazos and Fire episode number 62. Our guest today is Nidhish Shivashankar. It's been a year since he's been on the show. Nid is a graphic designer, an occasional substacker. His substack is called A Book Unbound. I'll put a link to the show notes. Go check it out. He should be having some new stuff coming out pretty soon. And if you want to get a more personal take on some of Nid's on the previous interview, check out episode number 29. That's the one that we did about a year ago. Welcome, Nid.
What's up, Carlos? Glad to be back.
Yeah, man. So yeah, the reason I had brought you on was because we're part of this Monday. Well, we call it like the men's group for on Renegade University there with AJ Van Slyke and we've been hanging out in this and yeah, this not this past well, no, not yesterday, the week before. Man, we got into a good conversation. It was you, a couple of the homies. Man, it was just it had been a while since I thought that we had one where it was like fucking rolling. Sometimes we just talk some bullshit here and there, but at least for me, it felt good. You could just tell that everybody was elevated up. Their energy was a little, I mean, towards the end, you were like, oh shit, it's way past my bedtime, man. Like this shit got real good. So I was trying to capture some of that because I thought that it'd be cool to have my audience or different people I don't know, maybe get a glimpse a little bit into kind of the conversations we have in there. And I don't know, maybe there's some value to that, just to have a better understanding on different perspectives. But before we get into that, I don't know, man, give a short background into yourself, but also for the purposes of this conversation, kind of also include a little bit of your like religious, spiritual upbringing in the mix there, if you don't mind. So short and a little bit on the longer side on the religious, spiritual stuff, man, just so people kind of have a little bit of a background on that. And look at the screen, Vato. You see? Be careful, Vato.
All right. So yeah, like I personally I think philosophy is really important. I mean, a lot of people think that philosophy is kind of superfluous because we live like in this material world and like things are just like as they appear to be or whatever. But I think that philosophy is important in the sense that the way that things are doesn't designate how things ought to be, nor what you should do about them. So, like, in order to actually have an aim in your life, in order to have some direction, you need to be able to identify the things that you value and prioritize. Um, Alexander Bard, who's a guy that I guess like Thaddeus Russell's had him on a few times. Like he's kind of like in the mix, and he says that classically, if you look at Judaism, Zoroastrianism, and Taoism, there was never a separation between philosophy and religion. So religion was always essentially a philosophical enterprise, and like even classical conceptions of God wasn't like a characterization of a person. Rather, it was the byproduct of philosophical like abstractions. So yeah, I mean, I don't really feel super qualified to talk about religion per se. I mean, I only know religion sort of like secondhand. Actually, in that conversation last week, it was more that I was sort of grilling the other people who were more religious because I wanted to like learn from them. But yeah, so where I'm coming at it from is more definitely like an enlightenment sort of classical view of things. I think that the Dark Ages were bad. Like I think that Abrahamic religions and revealed religions more generally are kind of a waste of human potential. I think that Aristotle is like pretty on point about most things, and yeah, and I think that in modern times, like Nietzsche, Kant, Deleuze, these guys are more useful in a philosophical sense than pretty much anything in between, excluding maybe like mystics of particular varieties like Sufis or some Christian mystics. But generally, Alexander Bard says that Christianity and Islam are basically bastardized versions of Judaism, and they're religions that were made for the masses with no philosophical depth. And I mean, I basically agree. I don't really see how I could disagree. So that's where I'm at.
So yeah, okay, and we'll get into all of that. How were you brought up? As a little kid, how did you know, I don't know, I don't know. I don't know. Even in those discussions on our men's group, I mean, we don't go real deep, one on one. We just kind of all kind of give general stuff. But I don't know, man. Like as a kid, I know that you can give a little bit of your background of where your like parents are from, or where what generation of
Yeah.
immigrant you're in and all that. But yeah, I don't know, just kind of give some of that, like stories of when you were a kid of, hey, this is how they taught me some lessons, because this, I don't know, man, just freestyle on some of that, because I'm interested and my audience would be interested in that.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm technically like a first generation immigrant because I wasn't born here. My family moved here when I was 3, but I'm pretty Americanized. Like I sound Western and whatnot. But my parents are like my parents and I moved here. Like we didn't even have any other family like out here. Later on, some people moved out here, but yeah, it was just us for like the first, I don't know, 20 years of my life. We'd visit now and then. Man, it's hard to like give an overview of Hinduism just because it's so fundamentally different from like Western religion that like it's hard to know where to start exactly. But then on top of that, depending on where you go in India, because like the concept of a nation state that has been sort of in Western tradition since I don't know, like basically colonial empires started like a few hundred years ago, like like the French Empire and whatnot. Like the nation state has been a thing, but India, as we now know it, is basically like an invention of the British Empire. Like they left, they put all the Hindus in India, they put all the Muslims in Pakistan. They just like caused a bunch of strife, and then they pieced out. Um, I mean, if you want to go back further, like there were empires like the Mauryan Empire and the Mughal Empire that kind of had all of India bound together. But formally speaking, like the bureaucratic structure of those types of empires versus modern, basically post Enlightenment empires, like after the British Empire, like it's just they're just very different things. So when we say India now, it doesn't really connotate like one particular thing in the way that if I said Catholicism, it connotates one particular thing. And even inside of India, I mean, like obviously Hinduism would be the main religion. That's what I was brought up in. But there's like a bunch of varieties and like offshoots, like and there are different ways of referring to it. Like there's like a Vedantic doctrine. There's just like Hinduism. There's different like sects within Hinduism because Hinduism has this like tripartite god structure. So you have like Brahma, you have Vishnu, you have Shiva, which basically represents like the beginning and the middle and the end of things. So you have different sects that worship like some of them are Shiva worshippers. Some of them are more Brahma worshippers. I mean, they all roughly believe in the concepts of Hinduism, but yeah, like what specifically are their particular like what do they prioritize will vary. I mean, yeah, so it's just like a very broad thing. So what my family did is not really reflective of what Hinduism looks like in general or any of that stuff. So like as far as me growing up, yeah, we wouldn't eat meat on Mondays and Thursdays. There was generally like not a lot of meat eating, which I've been like paleo carnivore for like over 10 years now, so I definitely think that was like a huge negative. So there's that. I mean, if you go to India, like most restaurants will have a menu that'll have vegetarian and non-vegetarian options like side by side. So like it's a really common thing in India to prioritize vegetarianism. Like that's like a really common thing. And then obviously cow worship, so you drink milk and you don't eat beef, and like you use milk products for a lot of things, and you'll even like if you live in like a village, you'll use cow dung to just in like various ways. They have like all sorts of uses for it. And yeah, like if I'm a little kid, like I get up in the morning, like like you brush your teeth, you take a bath, and then you'll go up to the little shrine. So you'll have like a photo of God or like some representation or like various representations, maybe like a statue or some images. And then yeah, you'll just like walk up, like you'll say a prayer for a couple minutes or however long the prayers are. I want to say that like I had like a long prayer memorized. It was probably like 2 minutes long, and you would just say that every morning. Like my parents would always say, like, go pray to God before you speak to us. Like, don't look at anybody until you look at God. Like that should be the first thing you look at in the morning. And yeah, I think that's the totality of what it was for me growing up. I mean, obviously as a kid, like in order to get you involved, like you'll hear stories about like tales of heroism. Like there are heroes in in the Bhagavad Gita and like these classical Indian texts. So you have like Hanuman and Ram. Ram gets his bride stolen from him by this bad guy. He like goes to this island and like steals her back. Like there's all this like badass stuff that happens in any classical mythology. So like there's stuff like that too. But as an adult, I think that I don't really have any relationship to Hinduism in that regard. What I do value is pre-Puranic Hinduism. So there's these two eras, basically the Vedas and the Puranas. Before the Puranas, there were the Vedas, and there was an entirely different sort of philosophical structure behind them. The main god was a different guy. Like it was literally just different guys. Like there was Indra, who was the god of war, and then he had like his boys like Agni, which is fire. He had I think Vayu, who is the god of air, and I'm like very like surface level about most of this type of mythological stuff. Like I don't know too much, but basically like at the Vedas, if you read the Upanishads, which are basically the philosophical texts of Hinduism, and if you read the Upanishads, which are in the Vedas, like the older versions of them, it's very like tactile. It's very physical. It's like the way that they describe things is very much like when you breathe, when you take like a deep breath, like when you close your eyes and you take this deep breath and you feel like the power of oxygen surging through you, that's Indra. Like it's very sort of grounded and earthly and physical. But then when you sort of get into the Puranas, you have like a totally different philosophical worldview, which comes from, as far as I'm aware, it comes from a different philosophical idea that comes from the Brahmins, which weren't really a thing in the Vedantic times, but in the Puranic times, the Brahmins come in and they institute this whole thing where it's like there is this like totalizing God called the Atman, and just like how a human being will have like fingers and arms and legs and like different body parts, the Atman is this universe, and we're all inside of the universal Atman, and we all have like our own little part to play, and therefore the people who are sort of like the spiritual class, who are the Brahmins, basically we are able to sort of commune with this philosophical like overarching structure, and therefore we're analogous to the head of the Atman. But then like people who work with their hands, they're more analogous to the to like the sorry, people who like go to battle and fight, they're analogous to the hands of the Atman. People who just like will run a small shop, or maybe just like be a trader or something, they call them vaishyas. They're analogous to the legs. And then like people who work, basically like any type of work, they're analogous to the guts, to the asshole, or to the feet. So they basically institute a caste system based on a division of body and mind, when this Puranic structure comes in. And then there's this story of Krishna, who is one of the later gods, basically, and he talks about Indra, who was the previous god. And Indra is this really cool, badass guy, and I'm not really going to go into the whole story, but basically, like Indra has this confrontation with Krishna, and Krishna's like, "You see those ants walking over there? Those ants just walking one by one. Every single one of those ants to me is you. So I see you, Indras, come and go. I don't give a fuck. Like I am beyond." So basically, my point is that the conception of life of the Puranas, which is different from the conception of life in the Vedas. The Vedas is earthly, tactile, physical. Drink soma, like raid a village, kill a bull, like go hunting. It's very like physical and kinesthetic and like sort of like pleasurable in like a very raw sort of way. But then the Puranas comes in and says, "Oh, you think you're a badass? I'm beyond you, because I am this like priestly sort of like supernatural entity. And just like you see ants walking one by one, I see your life come and go. And therefore, like you don't matter. What matters is your relationship to the universal." And so yeah, like as an adult, I don't really value the second conception. I think it's vulgar. I think it's ascetic, and I think it like imposes a lot of restrictions on people. Like for example, the vegetarianism and all this stuff. It's very anti-life. And yeah, so as far as I relate to Hinduism, I would relate to the classical, which is a lot closer to maybe like Greek mythology or something, in terms of hero worship and like physicality and like masculinity and that rawness to it. But yeah, like when you get into priestliness, which is also the issue with Christianity, I think it's ugly. Like I don't think it's philosophically desirable to think that way.
Yeah. So yeah, you kind of touched a little bit on the on one of the points that was that we was made that at that conversation we had, and that was to kind of well, you said that that guy Andrew Beard or Baird said
Bard.
that it was a bastardization. So what is it about this Jesus Christ and the story uh, of him that appeals to the masses, that that just doesn't fly with you? Like, what specifics can you give to that?
I mean, there's like a couple different angles. So Alexander Bard's point is that Judaism is like a more philosophical, coherent concept, but Christianity doesn't really have any relationship to those concepts. What it does is it just takes like little bits and pieces of it, it waters it down, and then like it becomes this like theater. It becomes like a reference to the original thing rather than the thing itself. Um, this is like the limits of my knowledge. Like it's more stuff that I've heard other people say than stuff that like I've investigated personally. But what I know is that like as far as I'm aware, in the Old Testament and like other Jewish texts, they try not to anthropomorphize God. They try to make it in so anthropomorphize means like make it a person. It's like they don't want it to be a person. They want it to be this like pervasive force that's just like something that you grapple and contend with, but it's not supposed to be like your dad or
Is that
something like.
the piranhas parallel? Piranhas parallel?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, it's not necessarily that way, but yeah, sure. Like that's you could say that. Yeah, it's pretty similar. I'd say the difference is I don't know if Judaism has a caste system built into it so much. Like so in the Puranas, the Atman is meant to be sort of like it's not just this overarching system, but it's this overarching system that can take the form of a human being in the sense of like the Brahmins are the head, and then like the working class is like the genitals in some ways. So there's this like extrapolation, but in Judaism, I think it is a lot more like impersonal and anonymous as far as I'm aware. And yeah, it's more like the way that I conceptualize it is it's like the moon. It's like this lunar force. Like if you imagine how the moon affects waves, it's like it's very like impersonal. It's like the waves don't have any particular figure or anything. Everything just kind of like and it flows and moves. And I mean, if you think about like the core mythos in Judaism, which is the Exodus, like they wander through the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. I mean, it just seems like there's this sense of surrender, but it's not like a bad thing. It's not a surrender in the sense of nihilism or apathy, but rather it's surrender in the sense of like of letting go. And I think that there's this element of letting go that's in Judaism where it's like, yeah, they were nomads in that particular story because they had to leave Egypt and become wanderers. And yeah, it just seems like they're. And then if you look at what the Jews did in Europe for the next 2,000 years, they were people who weren't of any particular locality. Like that's what made them successful bankers and capitalists and merchants and all that because they would always like move around and like they were never like fixed. Like they and I don't want to say that they didn't have cathedrals because I think that because obviously they would have like synagogues and stuff, but I just it just seems like a totally different way of looking at the world. Where later on, if you look at the philosophers who also happen to be Jewish, like Spinoza, or then even later like Mises and the Austrian school people, they have this sense of what the Deleuze would call deterritorialization, where it's always about these flows. Like it's never about like being fixed into one place and doing one thing. It's like being in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. Like you're surrendering to sort of like the way of things and you're flowing through them. And so the god of that particular way of looking at things becomes this like it becomes the thing which is producing these flows. And so it's kind of analogous to how the moon will affect the water. It's like it's very lunar. And there are works of there is this one work by this guy Maurice Samuel. It's probably like taboo to talk about it, but it's called "You Gentiles," and it's basically a work of Jewish supremacy. Like it's somebody who believed that Jews were better than basically everybody else. And their point was that basically everybody who's not a Jew is an Aryan, and the Aryanness is the thing that basically that what I was describing about Indra earlier. It's like that aspect of you that is like your ego, like your primal drive, like your willingness to go conquer, like those the good feelings that come with that. Those are all things that that particular author would classify as Aryan. And then he says like to be Jewish is to be something which lets go, and in that letting go, you become sort of like a higher class of being than people who are not like that. That particular guy frames it in a very like supremacist sort of like it sounds kind of nasty when you put it that way.
So would that guy be against the state of Israel then, right? He'd probably be against the state of Israel.
I'm not sure. I mean, I assume he's probably a Zionist because I mean, if he thinks that Jews are better than everybody else, then he probably would want them to
Oh,
sort of like
I thought you were kind
conquer.
of making not saying that he
So
would make.
I think that your extrapolation from the philosophical premises is correct. Like it, yeah, like I think personally that the idea of Israel seems a bit antithetical to what Judaism is. But I don't know if that guy would make
Oh,
that
okay.
connection. Yeah, but yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it seems like Israel is
Because
kind
I
of like
never heard that. I've never heard that take that. Okay, yeah. I mean, I always just thought, okay, the chosen people, and when you're considered the chosen people, and a lot of world religions are based off of like, or your first Old Testament or whatever. Well, then, you when you're the original, you think you're chingon. You think but that was that was the level that I thought of it. I never thought of it as like, oh, if these people think that they're a stateless people, so they're not bound by the conventional idea of how we see our borders and stuff like that. They're above that, I guess, is what I'm kind of getting the take of what you're saying
yeah.
of what that guy said. So then that's why I just tied it to like being against the state of Israel. But no, I've also never heard of it in that take. But then that kind of then takes us to then why you think then that you had not you, but that guy Andrew Baird said, and you Beard said, but that the other religions are like bastardizations of the Jewish religion because of that. Because is it just about being the original? Is it
It's
about just
it's
being about
not
the original?
it's not about being the original per se. Like the originality is not necessarily a thing. Like hypothetically, so for example, right? Like in Islam, there's the Sufi sect, which is not necessarily the original Islam, but they seem to have a higher level of philosophical depth than like the other strains.
Oh, okay, okay,
Um,
okay. So they
so
know.
so go ahead.
No, no, I was gonna say. So yeah, yeah. It's not just about being the original. It's that they have that they're coming with some weight. I know that the one of the subjects that kind of came up at that conversation that I'm trying to capture a little bit um was that we had I had kind of told you, and I think I have told people this before. I've told this before that like I'm not very religious, but I've also kind of lived my life uh, in a way where I don't want to ask for forgiveness from anybody. So I've even kind of recently have said that like I think suffering is probably easier to handle uh, uh, than to ask for forgiveness. It's probably harder for me to ask for forgiveness, and it's probably easier to suffer. And
Hmm.
so I had mentioned that I don't know, to me it comes off as like if when I'm about to my last breath, that I would still at the end though ask for forgiveness just in case I have to, just to get into heaven. Like, hey, I've always I
Well,
was I always was taught that, hey, well, the God, Jesus, whatever, because I was Catholic, but I wasn't like really into it, but I did all my shit, like I did all the stuff, and I got married Catholic and all that. But I always just thought, well, if they say that he's all about forgiveness, he should forgive me there at the end. I wasn't an asshole. Let me in. And when that came up, I remember you had mentioned something to the effect of like, ask forgiveness from what or something like that. Can you kind of get into that a little bit? Because I remember that kind of what you were indirectly challenging something that I had thought about, not thought about, of the way that I think about a lot of my life. But not that it was a challenging, it was just like an insight into like yeah, yeah, forgiveness from what? But I mean, that's just the way I think, but I don't know, man, just get freestyle on that. Cause I
Yeah, dude.
remember
So
that.
so there's a couple things in what you were just saying. So obviously I've heard you say that before, like in the group and stuff and other places where you're like, man, if forgiveness is the only thing, then I'm just gonna fucking I'll ask for forgiveness on the deathbed. Just why not just hedge the bets? Like it makes sense. And actually I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm pretty sure I heard a story about a king in like medieval times who converted to Christianity on his deathbed, and so that there's some precedent for that. I don't remember any more details about that though, but I'm sure if you just Google "king converts to Christianity on deathbed," you'll find something. Um, yeah, you know what's interesting about the way that you just described it right now, though, is that like I've never heard you sort of give this setup to that before, where you were just saying that it's easier to suffer than to ask for forgiveness. And so then it's like, but then, dude, let me challenge you where it's like you're on your deathbed. You're, I don't know, let's say you live a long time. You're 104. You've got 104 years of never asking for forgiveness, right? Like it's ingrained in you to prefer suffering over forgiveness. I don't believe you. I think your ego at that last moment is going to be like, fuck them too. I ain't asking for forgiveness from nobody.
I like that, dude. Hey, that sounds like a metal song. Hey, you might be right, dude. I mean, hey, I'm not challenging back. That sounds. Hey. Instead of oh shit, I didn't want to say this because I was bad. But I was about to say, is that when I start hearing Slayer's "Hell Awaits"? Right there, right there.
Maybe.
Fuck, dude, damn. Uh, I don't deny that you might be right on that because I am kind of like a competitive nature, and even my way of thinking that way of hedging my bets in that way is me being competitive, man. Like even with the higher, and maybe it's not cool to do that shit, and I don't know. I guess I'll find out at the end, but yeah, man, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you're challenging me, but you're actually pointing it out to my audience, man. That I think like that. I know Vanessa, my wife, yeah, she doesn't like when I kind of say stuff like that, and I'm not. I don't say it to be like, oh, I just okay. If forgiveness is the main thing that at least I was always taught. Well, live a life where you don't have to ask for forgiveness, not because you're doing things that are bad, but because you're doing things that are so good and you're not fucking people over, you're trying to, because to me, underneath all of that is the suffering I'm talking about. It would be a lot more fun, a lot more, it would be there's a lot more stuff that you can do if you didn't care about not having to ask for forgiveness. So that's kind of where I say so the suffering to me is like the slow suffering of life that seems easier to me than to ask for forgiveness. I don't know if that makes sense, man. I mean,
Yeah, dude, no, it makes perfect sense.
okay, it does
So
because
there,
I've never put this to words in this way until that conversation, man. That's why I wanted to have you on. I've never said it in this way, So I don't know, man. Yeah, freestyle off of that, man. I mean,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just
So there, I mean, there's two things, right? Like one, it's well, like you said, it's your competitive nature. So if I'm, I don't know, maybe like your parents or some authority figure when you're a teenager, and I come at you and I'm like, hey, you need to repent, otherwise you're gonna spend eternity in hell. And then obviously, I mean, obviously, you're gonna come back at them and be like, well, I just need to repent like a minute before I go to hell, right? Like that, then I'm good, right? Like it's a perfectly logical sort of yeah, like of course that's what your reaction would be. And I think this kind of goes back into what Bard says about Christianity lacking depth is that, I mean, if you really think about it, right, like why doesn't everybody do that? Or why wouldn't everybody do that? Like, if the assertion is that you need to repent before God in order to spend an eternity in heaven, then yeah, just fucking repent at the last minute. Like, hopefully you don't forget, but like, other than that,
I
you
thought
know,
about that too. I'm like, fuck, in a car crash, like, oh, or some shit like,
right.
fuck, I didn't even get to do it.
Yes. So I mean, but like, do you think is that the only reason why people don't? It's just so insurance, just in case like they don't forget at the last minute. Like I don't think that that's what drives people's like spiritual
Well,
motives. You
well,
think?
man, I don't know. I mean, you're asking me, and it's funny because I like this conversation. We're just talking now. Again, I would just think that if 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 what everything they told me, like in the concept of what is it called, like the concept of the universe and time being so massive, my life is so small that okay, if it was right that they said that he would that they would forgive me and let me into into heaven or whatever for eternity, that yeah, you know, my forgiveness, I'm thinking it will be sincere. I mean, I don't think I'm gonna I mean, I don't know unless anyway, I'm thinking the way that I've thought is that it would be like, hey, you know, I'm sorry if I didn't live up to, you know, the standard of whatever you would have normally have wanted from regular people. I'm not a regular person, but you know, I'm sorry, and you know, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be, kind of thing. But like, I guess I would say that um, I just thought of it as oh man, it's hard to say because I've never really talked about this in this way, but like it's just that um, it's as if I'm so insignificant, but I'm so universal in my mind to think that if they give you the concept of like, oh, eternity, and then you're an individual, you just have this big space to play in that I guess you can, I can formalize these structures in my brain to make me want to uh, be a good person, but also if I fuck up, it wasn't a big fuck up because I know I wasn't gonna go anywhere like towards crazy fuck up because that's not in my structure of how I live my life. And I think my setup has made me an okay person, you know, like I don't, you know, so the evidence is in how I am, how I try to be to other people, how I am with, you know, so man, I don't know if I really answered the question you're asking me, but you know, that is how I kind of think of this stuff. But also, you know what? I remember too, just to kind of tie back into something you said was that you know, that yeah, if you were telling this to a kid, um, it would be very simple. Like the reasoning would be very like simple to think, okay, well, I'll just do it at the end, which is probably what stayed with me, right? Because I remember you too saying at that conversation, like that the Christian environment of how kids are brought up, or the whole Christianity, that it is kind of a form of because it has to appeal to the masses. It's kind of a childish or a playground way of looking at things. And yeah, yes, I don't know why other people don't do it like I did, but I would just say that when I remember I heard you say that at that time, I just automatically, not without even feeling, like I just thought, well, you know, I'm a kid at heart, so why wouldn't I stay with the setup that I've put myself as a kid that has led me in the right path or whatever. You know, I'm trying to say a little bit. I don't know if that's making sense or
Yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah. It's just like I'm feeling like four different ways that I could go from this.
Go
So
ahead,
I'm trying
man.
to
Go
no,
mix
I'm
them
trying to
up,
like
man.
I'm trying to put it together in my head like how to respond to you because that guy that I was telling you about earlier who wrote the Jewish supremacy book, You Gentiles, that's actually one of the points he makes at the beginning of the book. He's like, Aryans or Gentiles, they are children, like fundamentally, like because they view the world through this like egoic lens. And that is what makes the Jewish people better than them, is because they sort of are willing to subjugate that aspect of themselves to sort of participate in this like universal almighty. And so yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Rolling back a few beats, I think that the way in which these concepts are presented has to be sort of like framed in the context of Judaism to actually have merit. Like in the sense that I like Nietzsche, right? Like and Nietzsche was all about master slave morality, and Judaism is an example of slave morality. So it's not really like he had positive things to say about Jews and Judaism and stuff, but it wasn't really like the standard of virtue that he was putting forward. Like he was saying like we need to become like supermen. Like, he wasn't saying we need to become more Jewish. But like he had like a certain type of respect for Jews, and he didn't really have that same type of respect for Christians. And the reason why,
Let me
and
interrupt real quick, just because so my audience, just in case you don't know who Nietzsche is, I don't either. I hear him a lot, but he also wrote a book called The Antichrist that does
Mhm.
that just speaks of I don't know, man. I did a little overview on it a couple of days ago, and yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating stuff. But anybody that wants to
So
look into it, you know, look
to
into it.
sum
You
it
know.
up, to sum it up, right? Like the most important line in that whole book is at the bottom of it there was one Christian and he died on the cross. So like Christianity and Nietzsche's model is not actually about Jesus Christ the person, or Jesus Christ, or even like the teachings of Christ necessarily. Rather, Christianity is about the way that the story of it's the way that the story affects like the human psyche. Like Nietzsche considers himself a psychologist, not a philosopher. And so like when he hears about Christianity, he's not saying like he's not thinking who is Christ the prophet? What did he say? How do we emulate him? How do we follow him? What were his words? Rather, he's thinking, what is this story? Like, you think about any story, right? Like, the main character of a story is not the same as the narrative of the story. A really exaggerated example of this is the book Justine by Marquis de Sade, who, if you've ever heard the term sadism, it comes from this guy's name, de Sade, because he was this writer who wrote extremely like disgusting, vulgar, violent sort of works that were they were sadistic, like they were cruel, they were violent, and they were sexual. And Justine is the main character in this book, and Justine is a very pure-hearted person. She's for example, she's fucked up. She's just been imprisoned. She escaped an imprisonment. She's walking down the street and she sees a beggar, or she sees like a really poor person on the side of the road, and she reaches into her coin purse after having just been imprisoned by this guy, and she like reaches into her purse to give him a coin, and the guy punches her in the stomach, grabs her purse and runs off with it, right? And that's an example of wherein you have a main character who is pure, but then the story is showing you ways in which that purity can be taken advantage of, and is basically kind of mocking the purity of it. And so, like, similarly to how Justine the character is not the message of Justine the book, the message of the book is, look at Justine's sister. Justine's sister was a slut. She played the game, and she's happy. She's living in this nice place. Justine isn't playing ball with the rest of us. She thinks she's better than everybody, and even though she's so pure, all her virtues just lead to degradation, right? And that's an example where there is an argument which is being presented by the story, which is different from the argument being presented by the main character. And so Nietzsche is sort of looking at the story of Jesus in a similar way, where he's not really looking at like what did Jesus say personally, which is why he's saying at the bottom there was only one Christian and he died on the cross. He's saying, what is Christianity doing to the psyche of people in the world? What is it doing to the psyche of Europeans? And to him, basically, what it does is it imposes a narcotic feeling of pity onto people. You see your God on the cross and you feel bad. And that bad feeling is the thing which like it becomes your spiritual ethos, is that feeling of pity. It's this inversion of values where instead of, in, for example, the Old Testament, you have this God which is like causing floods, doing crazy shit, like or even in like Greek mythology, you have Zeus like coming down, like throwing lightning bolts and like impregnating women in the form of a bull. Like these classical gods are all like crazy badass people, or in the case of the Old Testament, they're like beyond peopleness. They're just this like voice in the sky which has these demands about how the world ought to be in some sense. Whereas in Christianity for Nietzsche, it's like, well, that whole thing just got flipped upside down, and now you're seeing your God on the cross as a human being, and like that image becomes it becomes like a narcotic, it becomes like an opiate, it becomes this thing which numbs your sensitivity to life, and it becomes this sort of like feeling of it basically brings out what Nietzsche calls the last man. It's like somebody who doesn't know what happiness is, somebody who doesn't know what pride is, somebody who doesn't know what glory is. It's just somebody who's like embedded in that feeling of just like vulgarness and pity, and just being like, even God is like fucked by us. We are bad. It's like it just has this compound effect of becoming a negative feeling. And like I said, Nietzsche viewed himself as a psychologist. So he's looking at the story, and he's saying like, what is this story doing to me as I'm hearing it? And he's saying, oh, this story is one which glorifies pity as the highest virtue. And in doing so, it kind of puts people in this like very anti-life mode. And instead of producing Supermen out of Europeans, which it should have done, it produces last men. And there's ways in which sort of Christianity undoes itself. For example, he talks about Cesare Borgia, I think. Basically, the Pope's son. I might be thinking of the wrong person, but basically, it was the Pope's son who was this like he was a very Machiavellian type person. He was very earthly. He cared about like earthly things, like he cared about amassing power and wealth and all this stuff. But he was the son of the Pope at the time. And Nietzsche was basically saying like Catholicism had gotten to this point in its history where the Christianity and Catholicism was about to become undone. Like there wasn't even going to be Christianity anymore, because there were these like new figures in the Renaissance taking over the Christian archetype and making it into this new thing. And then he basically says like Protestantism comes in and undoes all that by like undermining the power structure of the Catholic Church, and then making people into good Christians. And being a good Christian is actually a bad thing to Nietzsche. Like he'd rather have bad Christians, which was like the Pope at the time and whatnot. So
And then that kind of then gets us into the one part where then uh almost like in this story of what Nietzsche's saying or what you're saying, or even the conversation we had at the time, uh, we're talking about forgiveness and the sacrifice and all of that, and to a certain, and then at a certain point, just like in history, the way that you presented it, we hit the Renaissance, and when you were talking about at that conversation we had, you started tying it into the art of the time, and how it kind of transcended another level besides just being, again, just tying to the character of what the artist at the time, I guess pre-Renaissance was trying to depict, and doing a little bit of the, because I've done a little bit of like looking into like the Renaissance and that family, the Medici, or
mhm.
the Florence family. Like, I
Yeah.
guess pre-Renaissance, like artists didn't even like they didn't even sign their artwork really. And so like in the Renaissance, I guess it was more of a they put more weight on the individual and different. So like, can you speak to that some? Because just like
Yeah,
in the
can I
story, go ahead, man. Yeah, what's up?
yeah, but can we come back to that though? Because
Yeah.
let's talk about the relationship between Judaism and Christianity real quick, because we've been like nudging up against it, but not really. We haven't talked about it yet. Basically, I think the reason why Alexander Bard says that, and actually this will segue into the Renaissance topic, is basically the reason why Alexander Bard says that is that all the philosophy is in the Judaism, and then Christianity just just kind of skims the cream off the top and then presents it as something. So like, for example, in Judaism, when you I forget there's a word for it, but like plenty of Jewish people have talked about it. Basically, there's this idea that when you when you pray, like when you're like when it's the Sabbath, or when you're taking downtime and when you're thinking about like the universe and stuff, well, for one, it's like, yeah, you as a Jewish person have sort of this obligation to think about the universe. Like there is this philosophical sort of bent to it, sort of just in that fact. It's like I, as a Hindu person growing up, nobody told me to like think about the metaphysics of reality, right? Like, or for most people, I mean, nobody tells them to philosophize about the world. But apparently, like in the Jewish culture, I've heard Ben Shapiro talk about this. Like, there's a proclamation, there's an imperative that you must do this. Like, you need to grapple with what God is. You don't just like passively accept it. It's like you need to put your will into it, and to like understand what is meant by things and to work through that, rather than just like take it at face value. And I think that that's sort of what Alexander Bard is referring to when he's talking about the difference in depth. Because yeah, like when you say forgiveness, like forgiveness from what? You need to have the Old Testament. You need to have the concept of original sin. Like you need to have Adam and Eve, and then Eve takes a bite of the apple, and then they get thrust out, and then you have something that you need to be forgiven from. But without that, like forgiveness from what? And then it's like Jesus comes as a Jew in order to prescribe a message that is supposed to be a fulfillment of Jewish prophecy. Like these things are supposed to sort of go hand in hand. And I think that in Christianity, and this is probably something Nietzsche would agree with, is like that aspect of it just kind of gets plucked out. It's like you're just plucking out this character of Jesus, rather than this conception of like divinity, which is something you're supposed to grapple with. Instead of like grappling with the divinity, rather than that, it's like you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and he just becomes the model to emulate. So instead of grappling with a concept, you have emulation of a person. So I think in that sense, I mean, it's literally like a more vulgar version of the original thing, where it's like, yeah, is it more philosophically like meaningful to think about the universe and how you fit in, and the laws that have been passed down to you, and the rules of the tribes, and like all of the stuff, and to then make an assertion about what in your best estimates like a good person really is, and then to talk it over with the rabbis, and to talk it over with the community, and then become like a community figure, and sort of like become like this beacon of virtue? Is it, is that better, or is it better to just accept Jesus Christ as the Lord, and then that's and then you just follow in his footsteps and just do as he does, which is really like at the essence of what Christianity prescribes. I mean, Josh was talking about it the other night. He was saying that when somebody came to Jesus and
And Josh is, for anybody who doesn't know, he's on the men's group, and I've interviewed him before. He's a former
Border
immigration
Patrol.
border patrol.
Yeah. And I mean, he was saying that when somebody came to Jesus, Jesus replied and said, he basically said like, what should I do? And Jesus said, follow me, like throw your things away, just follow me. Like I am the light, the truth, the way. I don't know if that quote is exactly where that's from, but yeah. So I think that what Bard's getting at with that is to basically say that all of the significance of Christianity is just like a reflection of the deeper significances in Judaism, and and in that sense it becomes a religion from the masses. And then when you're a kid and you're and then somebody tells you like, hey, you need to be forgiven for your sins, and then you go, yeah, I'll be forgiven last minute, it's fine. It's like, yeah, so it's like, if you're Jewish and you've been grappling with these concepts, you would never even think that, because forgiveness isn't like an abstraction for you, right? Like forgiveness is something that you feel deeply like a need for, because you know that, oh, I as a human being am in a fallen state, and like because of like Adam and Eve, blah blah blah, because of like our idea of what our identity is, we do need forgiveness because we're not perfect. Like there is this feeling that you have that comes from this acknowledgement of principles, whereas there's, it's like, how do you get there from within Christianity? Kierkegaard is the only example that I know of. We talked about Kierkegaard last time that I was on. I have a Substack essay about him. I think Kierkegaard has like a really beautiful interpretation of what Christianity can be, and for him, I mean, for him, Christianity isn't supposed to be about any of the things that I've been talking about. Christianity rather is supposed to be about recognizing that as a human being, like you're so limited that like anxiety and nausea are inextricable from the human condition. So when Kierkegaard talks about forgiveness, it's not something that you become forgiven for later. It's not something that on your deathbed would really even have any value to you anymore. I mean, maybe it would. Maybe like a whole lifetime of like grief has been piling up in you, that on your deathbed, it's like you just let the dams burst open. And in Kierkegaard's model, that's actually a good thing. Like he says, the person who becomes the best Christian is the person who is the most resistant to it, because just like if you have a brick and like you have a really hard brick, you crack it, it cracks, it fucking explodes. And so similarly, it's like when your ego breaks and you have a really strong ego, you become a much better Christian for it, because you know what it was like to not be that way, and then you took it on, and it becomes this thing that like it has more significance, rather than somebody who they were just brought up in it and they're just like, oh, la di da, I'm a Christian, who cares, right? Like it's not a significant sort of thing. So basically, in Kierkegaard's model, the idea that you would ask for forgiveness on your deathbed as a get out of jail free card, and I think more generally, like in the Jewish model, I don't think that that is what they think is important. But I think that the reason why Christianity is popular is that they have simplified concepts. They like the way that Christianity is talked about isn't on that Kierkegaard level, and it's not even on the Jewish level. And so when they talk about these things, yeah, like as a kid, you're gonna go, okay, well, fuck it, forgiveness on my deathbed, who cares? But the point is supposed to be like, as a human being, we're so limited that if you don't sort of allow yourself to embrace the infinite, you're going to be forever in a state of dread and anxiety. Just like imagine if you're like a blind Imagine if you were like a blind deer walking through the woods. Like you don't know what's around you, you don't know what you're seeing. Like every single moment is going to be terror because you're a prey animal. Like you don't know what the fuck's going on. And just imagine being like a blind sort of rabbit or a deer just walking through the woods. Somebody could like hunt you down, like a wolf could eat you, like all sorts of shit could happen to you. And like in Kierkegaard's model, that's more like what it means to be a Christian is to basically open your eyes and be like, okay, like I accept my limitations, and like I'm okay with it. And because I have limitations, and I recognize in my neighbor that they have limitations, and we see in one another the fact that we're both human beings, that's where the ethos of love your neighbor comes from. And I think that's like a really deep and beautiful thing. But the more conventional model of understanding with the meaning of that is more like basically how a kindergarten teacher would evaluate their students, right? Imagine you're running a kindergarten class of like 15 kids. They're all like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. And like they're running around like pulling each other's hair and like picking at them. You'd be like, hey, you're being a very bad boy, right? Like you need to be nice to people. How would you like it if they treated you this way, right? So it's like that way of sort of just being kind of like scoldy and like, hey, love your neighbor. Hey, you need to be forgiven. Hey, it's very like talked down to, and I think it's all these connotations that are being encapsulated when Alexander Barth says basically like Christianity is it's just it's a religion for the masses. It doesn't have the philosophical depth that Judaism would. And I think that the Renaissance is basically the point at which European culture breaks out of that. And I think that's what makes the Renaissance so beautiful is the fact that they break out of that, and it happens very abruptly. And that's what Nietzsche is lamenting a few hundred years later. So the Renaissance was in like 1500, and then Nietzsche wrote the Antichrist in like mid 1800s, and Nietzsche's writing from Germany. The Renaissance begins in the Mediterranean, so it's like Mediterranean's down here, Germany's up here, and he's basically saying like, hey, us Germans, us Protestant, fucking like literate, educated PMC Germans, we fucked up. Like the Italians of a few hundred years ago would wipe the floor with any of us now, and it's because basically this Protestant ethos sort of like brought Christianity back into what would otherwise have been like a glorious Reformation. That ironically, the Protestant Reformation is what Reformation is called. But yeah, so Nietzsche wanted a different form of Reformation, which would have come through the Catholic Church and Cesare Borgia and the Renaissance and all that sort of stuff. And I agree. Like I think that it's yeah, I mean, you can ask me questions about it, but yeah, I think it's like so obviously superior. Like if you just like pay attention to the implications and the philosophy of it and the connotations that, yeah, I mean, it's ludicrous to think that Christianity drove the Renaissance. If the Renaissance was anti-Christian at its fucking heart.
Yeah, I man, I have a lot of ways to go with that. As I'm listening to you, I kind of, man, I don't know. It's a trip. It's a trip. It's a trip because I'm making your point of how a child, or as a kid, can have that mentality to say, okay, well, why not just do it on my deathbed? And but I also like listening to you say also, I've kept Christianity at a distance, or I've done the stuff that I have to do to kind of I did all my Catholic stuff and got married Catholic, just good vibes, it's good, all that stuff. But like, I don't know, listening to you is kind of like you're describing me a little bit in the way that I kind of uh don't live in the in that way of since I feel that I can just do it at the end, I just live my life the best way that I
Yes.
can,
So Nietzsche would say that that's a good thing, and that's what he liked about the way that the Catholic Church was evolving at the time of the
Okay.
Renaissance. Like he would say, like, yeah, that's good because you're following like you're having like a more instinctual relationship to life. Like you're not turning away from life. Is the terminology that he would use. Like a priest turns away from life. Like Jesus turns the other cheek, whereas like you're and like I mean you were saying earlier, like oh like if I go through life and I'm like so insignificant and like as long as I'm trying to be a good person, I don't see what the issue is, right? Like there's a way in which you're framing it that's very earthly, and Nietzsche would appreciate the earthliness of it. And in Nietzsche's model, Catholicism makes Christianity earthly at the time of the Renaissance, and the Germans and the Protestants kind of ruin all of that. So there's that, but then fuck, there's something else I was going to point out. So basically, so far, like as you were saying just now, you were saying that yeah, like a lot of the criticisms that I'm pointing out do seem to apply to you. And I think that most people who are Christian, they would probably feel like, yeah, like when I was growing up, these criticisms basically ring true to how Christianity was preached to me, like as a kid. But then the question becomes, is that a feature or a bug, right? Like is that baked into Christianity, or is that just people who fucked up and don't know how to describe the concepts effectively? And I think that that's where the Nietzschean analysis rather than a Bard comes in, where Nietzsche basically says like, yeah, like it's baked into Christianity, and the reason why is because the story itself is designed to invoke a feeling of pity in you. It's not a story that's designed to have philosophical merit. And so, I mean, when you get to, if you read like Kierkegaard or something, there is a very philosophical way to interpret it that's beautiful. But yeah, just like sticking with like Nietzsche and the way that it's conventionally practiced, it seems more like because I mean, if you practiced Christianity the way that Kierkegaard described the way you should practice Christianity, you wouldn't raise your kids Christian. You wouldn't really have congregations. You would have like basically mystic sects, because everybody who became Christian would have to actively decide that they were suffering so deeply in life that they accepted Jesus Christ into their heart, which is not like a practical way to run a religion. So, I mean, there is a sense in which like the Kierkegaard model of Christianity kind of undoes what Christianity was in some ways. I don't know. I mean, it's up for debate whether it's really a feature or a bug, but it seems to me like the essential details of it, all of the cool aspects seem to come from Judaism. And so, like when you have that fundamental abstraction from source material to conclusions, I don't know how you could have deep insights except if you're kind of coming at it from a different way, in a way that a mystic would, which is consistent with Kierkegaard. Maybe it's consistent with Eastern Orthodox, but yeah, what it definitely does is it undoes the formal structure of what the church generally is.
So then to kind of conclude a little bit here, what what aspects of knowing this and being a reader of these people like Nietzsche and these other people you were talking about, and growing up the way you did with Hinduism and all that, like what is what is your current like a moral compass on how you see the world and how you move in the world, and how you would want others, or what you would want others to take from uh, what you know, and apply it to their lives to maybe better themselves, or become a better version of themselves or something like that, to so yeah, man, freestyle that, I mean, that's I don't know if it's a deep question or not, but it sounds deep.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. It's hard to tell other people what to do with themselves, like because I think at the heart of your of what you're asking is like, how do I generalize from my experience to give other people something that they can reflect on? And I want to, but at the same time I don't want to. Like I think that,
No, but I want you to, Vato. I want
no,
you
I know,
to.
but I'm saying like, if I get,
Because if you
okay,
don't, then everything you were saying, it was jamming, but then there's no finale.
gotcha. All right. Yeah, I mean, so for one, I mean, okay, my personal feeling is that fundamentally I'm a person, right? Like I'm limited. I can't know everything. It's insane to look at the world from a state from a lens of objectivity. Like you are never objective. Like you're just you're already in the world. Like Heidegger has this term like being of the world, sort of like the tool at hand, the Dasein. Like they're just different ways of saying like you are never in this state of looking down on the world. You're already in the world. And so, but that's exactly why like it's hard for me to like to want to make an abstraction, for me to generalize from that and be like, hey, because of how I feel, this is what other people should also do. But I mean, to the degree that like you want to hear something like that. Okay, so let me put it this way. This isn't what I think other people should do necessarily, but this is what I think is like pretty fucking correct. Is that because you're a human being and because you're limited in those respects and because you don't have this third party objective viewpoint from which to view the world, you need to let go of concepts like morality, because a morality is a thing which is this overarching structure that hangs over your head, that is being imposed upon you from on high. Like the concept of morality is something that like doesn't really, shouldn't really hold any weight unless you as a person in your actions in the world are trying to represent something greater than yourself. But trying to construct something greater than yourself in your mind to represent is a very, very like egoic act. Like it's pretty arrogant to say that this definition of morality is correct. Like it's, or I mean, to even say, to say to make any claim on like what morality is, because the definition of morality means that it's this objective thing which is like sitting on top of and looking down from and making a judgment as to the quality of how it affects the greater whole. Which, I mean, if you were looking at an ant farm and you had like an ant farm or a fish tank on your desk right there, you could make a pretty clear statement about like, oh, this is good, this is bad for the ant farm, because the ant farm's in front of you. But like as a person, as an ant inside that ant farm, which is really all we are as people, we're just ants inside this ant farm. Then how are you, I can't step outside of what I am to make a universal proclamation. But what I can say is that my beingness is something that I can take for granted. I mean, if you've ever heard the term like I think therefore I am, which is Rene Descartes, like yeah, I mean he's basically saying like I can close my eyes, like I can shut off my ears, like I can turn away from everything. I can be skeptical of everything. You don't even exist, I don't exist, the computer doesn't exist, nothing exists. But when I do all that, I still am not at a 0 point, because I'm at myself, right? Like I can't shut off the fact that I am thinking, like I am sort of like being. And so when you look at it from that perspective, then it's like everything in the world is just a matter of like how does it affect your being and the sense in which you are. It's like, yeah, could you be as a junkie? I mean, maybe for like for how long? Like, what quality would that being connotate onto you? Like, what does it mean to live as a like? It would fucking suck, right? Like, just there's ways of being that are obviously better, more fun, healthier. Like, I don't know about morality, but I know about good health. I know about hygiene. Like, I know about what it means to feel pleasure. Like, I know about what it means to feel like I've accomplished something or to have comprehended something. And I think that that act, that pursuit of better, of comprehension, of understanding, of basically what the ancient Greeks would have considered like ataraxia, which basically means this contemplative state from which you can sort of like feel everything out and always just be in this state of understanding and knowing how to react to things and feeling in the flow of stuff. I think that's superior to morality. I mean, why would you choose to bind yourself except if you're a fucking coward? Like you don't know how to make judgments for yourself, so you have to reflect them onto a system. Nietzsche said, "I mistrust all systematizers." Right? Like it's you're just limiting yourself because you don't have the balls to make assertions about what the value of things is. But like if you're understanding the world in the first person, then you know very well like what it means to feel healthy. You know very well what it means to feel pleasure. You know what it means to be cruel or sadistic, and how that reflects not on your ability to sort of impose violence onto the world, but rather how it reflects on you feeling insecure and therefore you need to become sadistic onto somebody else. It's like all of these values that we sort of take to be good, like maybe even things that people don't classically associate with Nietzsche, like kindness or generosity or things like that. I mean, generosity is an aristocratic act because it means that you have so much you're willing to share it, right? Like there is a good health associated with the things that we consider good, and generally speaking, there is a bad health associated with things that we consider to be like sort of weak or corrupt or pathetic. Like hypothetically, right? If somebody were to sell you on why I don't know, sex is evil, right? Which I don't believe. I think sex is value neutral. But like if I wanted to sell you on the idea that Puritanism is good and sex is bad, I would not refer to sex in the sense of like a bunch of people having a party and having a good time and then like branching off and like playing around or whatever. I would refer to sex in the sense of like some pathetic John who like walks into some shady bar and just like is kind of like half covering his face out of shame and like meets some prostitute and like leaves the money on the nightstand because he doesn't want to look her in the eye as he's walking away. Like I would frame it, I would characterize it as a symptom of bad health. So like even in the way in which we describe things that we consider to be good or bad, really what we're doing is we're imposing concepts of good health and bad health. And these are not moral concepts because they don't come from without, they come from within. And I think that utilizing that and then like flowing through life, like in Taoism, there's this concept of being a leaf in the wind. It's like, yeah, just pay attention to that and then be a leaf in the wind. It's like, well, and if you're binding yourself, then yeah, I mean, you have no fucking balls. Like don't be a bitch. Like fucking, you don't need that shit. Fucking like take shit head on. Like understand what things are and understand what they mean to you. And that's a healthy way to approach life because you're in it. You're already in it. Why are you making shit up, bitch? You're already in it. Just fucking do it.
Yeah, no, we were all born Antichrist, if you want to kind of play around with that a little bit. But man, Nid, thank you for coming on. Please let people know where they can reach you and what you got.
Bro, don't reach me. Don't reach me. You're all just gonna fucking yell at me about this shit.
Well, no, or let the people know where they can what you got cooking on your Substack, man.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I update the Substack now and then. I'm a graphic designer by trade. Like, yeah, dude, I do like random shit. I make paintings and drawings all the time. Like, I love, like Da Vinci, Caravaggio, but I like the later stuff too, like Sargent and them. Yeah, dude, I like all sorts of stuff. I have an Instagram where I post some artwork. Lately, what I've been working on is just like some computer stuff, like computer science, like learning about coding and stuff like that. Yeah, dude, I follow my interests and they fucking I'm a leaf in the wind.
What's your Instagram?
It's lightning bolt 93. Instead of an O in the bolt, it's an underscore.
And your Substack?
Substack.com/Nidhish.
Alrighty, fair enough, man. Thanks for coming on, man. And yeah, man, this was good, man. It was a lot of fun. And I had never really engaged in this way, but obviously we would because I consider you a homie, so for sure, I hope the people like this, and for sure we got to do it again. Peace, man.
Yeah. Hell yeah, man. Peace out.